co-hosted by the University of São Paulo and the Planetary Health Alliance. I am Felipe Soares from the University of São Paulo, and I am very pleased to be introducing the Science Lightning Talks on non-communicable disease. 5 abstracts were selected and will be presented as pre-recorded videos. Subsequently, the authors will be participating in a live Q&A session. Now, I would like to introduce our moderator, Professor Lynn Martin. She's the inaugural professor of Population and Planetary Health at the School of Medicine at the University of Notre Dame, Australia. We know that given the time zone, it's very early for you, and we really appreciate your effort and willingness to participate. Professor Lynn Martin, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Felipe, and it's a great pleasure to join this session and have the opportunity to moderate. Thanks everyone for joining this very, very interesting and important session. To quote a recent publication, the burning of fossil fuels, especially coal, petrol and diesel, is a major source of airborne fine particulate matter, PM 2.5, and a major contributor to the global burden of mortality and disease. Increasingly, devastating wildfires fueled by climate change are adding to this air pollution. Air quality is a global public health issue. Today's presenters explore different aspects of this issue. Our presenters are Anna Ortigoza from Drexel University, Anastasia Montgomery from Northwestern University, and Aubrey Doede from the University of California, San Diego. Our last 2 speakers who we will hear from on the video can't be with us today for the panel that follows the video. Miriam Marler from the University of California, Los Angeles, will answer questions asynchronously at her virtual room using the chat feature at the platform. Similarly, Nilanjan Bhor from the Indian Institute for Human Settlements also can't join us and will handle questions in a similar manner. I now invite the video.
Thank you for your interest in this pattern. My name is Anna Ortigoza, and I'm going to present some details about the study on the association between ambient 2.5 and under 5 infant and child mortality in Latin American cities. Air pollution is a consequence of rapid urbanization, and particularly in Latin America, no study have investigated yet how longitudinal changes in PM 2.5 are linked to changes in child health, particularly among a large number of cities with varying levels of ambient air pollution in the region. Therefore, in this study, we aim to assess how increases in ambient levels of PM 2.5 over time were linked with mortality among children under 5 years of age, and whether this association is different for infants compared to young children. Over the 6 years period, we included 337 cities of 100,000 residents or more, and the corresponding subsidy administrative units in 7 countries in Latin America. In each subsidy unit, we collected information on the annual average of PM 2.5 for the same year mortality rates were estimated, and we calculated for each year under 5 infant and child mortality rates separately. We also accounted for other characteristics of cities associated with mortality and air pollution, and using a linear mixed model with random intercepts for city and subcities, we modeled the annual log mortality rates for each subsidy unit as a function of time varying and time invariant covariates. Through this model, we were able to find that increases in PM 2.5 in each subsidy unit over time were associated with increases in under 5 mortality rates, mostly driven by increases in infant mortality. Each increase in 1 microgram per cubic meter in PM 2.5 over time was linked to 0.4 and 0.5% increase in under 5 and infant mortalities, respectively, which means that when they extrapolated to the differences in PM 2.5 between the 10th and the 19th percentiles of PM 2.5 observed in our sample, this is equivalent to an increase by almost 9% of infant mortality rates, or 1 additional infant death per 1,000 live births, or more than 4,000 additional infant deaths each year, considering the absolute number of live births observed in our sample. These findings from cities in Latin America support the evidence from other regions about the deleterious effects of PM 2.5 in under 5 population, particularly among children under 1 year of age. And it is also a claim for cleaner environment in Latin America as necessary for improving both planetary and population health. I would like to acknowledge other authors and institutions that collaborated in this study. And if you're interested in this or other studies at the Salubal Project, please follow us on social media. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hello, and thank you for coming to my presentation. My name is Anastasia Montgomery, and I will be presenting on the co-benefits of electrifying Chicago's municipal vehicle fleet. I study air quality, which is not uniquely an urban problem, but it seems to be integral to the way of living in a city. We see high emitting sources like cars and power plants situated closely with high density populations. For this study, I focus on Chicago, which has been in ozone non-attainment since 2012. And to target pollution as well as climate benefits, the city has proposed the electrification of passenger buses. Our experiment takes this policy one step further. To set up this experiment, we use a chemical transport model called WRF-CMAC to simulate one representative summer month and one representative winter month at a 1.3 kilometer spatial resolution so that we can highlight neighborhood scale changes in air quality. For the electric vehicle scenario, we removed tailpipe emissions from a variety of municipal vehicles and performed 4 experiments: the electrification of school buses, passenger buses, all municipal vehicles, and school buses with light-duty vehicles. We then apply health response functions. As shown in this figure, we have the changes in atmospheric composition from the all-electric municipal vehicle scenario. Here, we show the changes in nitrogen dioxide, ozone, and particulate matter over the city of Chicago with neighborhoods outlined in black. And it's true, we remove municipal vehicle emissions and actually see an increase in ozone. This is because ozone is a secondary pollutant that depends on the emissions of NOx and volatile organic carbon emissions in a nonlinear fashion. Because of this relationship, this urban environment is NOx saturated. This just means that if we remove enough NOx from a NOx saturated environment, we actually end up creating an environment that destroys less ozone. This effect is known as the weekend effect because ozone increases on the weekends in cities because we do not experience rush hour traffic. Applying the health response functions, we see that the benefits of electrifying municipal vehicles end up overcoming the increase in ozone. There's a 1.4% reduction in CO2, and the avoided premature mortality results in $41 million in health savings. And expanding this analysis across all experiments, we show that the simulated pollutant changes resulted in both positive and negative chemical changes that were largely offsetting. Across all experiments, we get the weekend effect with increased ozone, so health outcomes were dependent on the changes in particulate matter. While the largest change in pollutants were observed with the electrification of municipal vehicles, the best health outcomes were observed with the electrification of school buses. Every policy reduced CO2 emissions, thus indicating that most of these policies were beneficial from a health and climate perspective. I would like to thank my co-authors for their work and SF for the funding, and I will be available for questions via email. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Aubrey Doede, and I will be talking about the impact of airborne pollutants on pediatric asthma in Imperial County, California. Imperial County is one of the most productive agricultural regions in the state. The defining feature of the region is the Salton Sea, which was formed accidentally during the construction of irrigation canals from the Colorado River. As a result, the Salton Sea is a landlocked body of water with no natural water inflow, and the majority of its water is from irrigation runoff. The history of water rights in California is an interesting example of the need for sustainable irrigation and farming practices. In 1922, the law of the river was established in order to define the water rights for each state that depended on the Colorado River. The price of water for farmers in California was also established at 20 cents per gallon of water. This price has not changed in almost a century, despite changes in inflation, water demand, and drought. As a result, farmers have seen water as a birthright and have engaged in unsustainable and water-intensive farming practices, such as this photo of flood irrigation from the Imperial Valley. However, during the recent major drought in California, water supply from the Colorado River dwindled, and farmers were forced to irrigate smaller areas of land. As a result, the Salton Sea received less water from irrigation runoff on which it depends for the majority of its replenishment. The Salton Sea's water level had already begun to diminish, but the years-long drought accelerated this process. In fact, this type of site is not uncommon along the shoreline today. As you can see from these satellite images, the dry lake bed has become increasingly exposed, which is susceptible to wind erosion that may cause a health exposure to nearby populations. We chose to focus the study on the pediatric population because children are an increased lifetime risk in terms of pulmonary growth, function, and development from air pollution, even continuing into early adulthood. In Imperial County in particular, almost a quarter of families live below the poverty line, making it difficult to adhere to asthma treatment or to move away from the exposure. In 2011-12, the peak years of the recent drought, Imperial County's emergency department admission rate for childhood asthma was double that of the entire state, making this a public health crisis targeting those with existing health disparities. Therefore, the study objective was to determine the effects of wind originating from the Salton Sea on pediatric emergency department admission for asthma. ED records were requested from the California Health Department for patients ages 2 to 18 based on ICD codes for asthma and related diagnoses. Due to the limitation that health data were only available at the zip code level and the nature of Imperial County where vast areas are unpopulated, population-weighted centroids were created using census block data. Buffers were then created using a standard deviational ellipse and were weighted by population density for each zip code in order to estimate where human exposures to air pollution were likely to occur. Particulate matter trajectories from the Salton Sea were estimated using a high split model, which allows for the tracking of a parcel of air from an origin point along a trajectory in 3 dimensions. Trajectories were calculated every 6 hours and ran for 12 hours each for the years 2006 to 2016. These trajectory points were then overlaid with the zip code exposure buffers, and days for which one or more trajectory points crossed a zip code buffer were considered exposure days for that zip code, accounting also for atmospheric stability based on that day's ventilation coefficient. Using a conditional Poisson regression, we found that on days with an exposure to wind or dust from the Salton Sea, there is an 18.7 increased likelihood of an ED admission for asthma in this population. Despite limitations related to potential confounding variables, other possible sources of pollution, and the assumptions made based on geographic resolution of the health data, the results of the study provide a direction for future research, especially as environmental events are expected to rise in frequency and severity. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Miriam Marler, and I'm an assistant professor at UCLA. Today, I'll be discussing an ongoing research project examining recent severe wildfire events in California and the implications for air quality and regional public health. I'd like to start with a brief overview of why the contribution of fires to air pollution is an important public health issue. Wildfire smoke contributes to several air pollutants, and our team is focusing on the contribution to fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, which is dangerous for public health. Previous studies have linked smoke PM 2.5 exposure to mortality and respiratory morbidity, and certain segments of the population are more vulnerable to these health effects. This brings me to our current project, where we're interested in characterizing smoke PM 2.5 exposure from recent large fire events in California. And specifically, we're interested in evaluating the fire emissions and subsequent air pollution from these large fire events. Then we will consider how certain strategies could reduce negative health outcomes. In the first part of our analysis, we're calculating high-resolution fire emissions estimates oriented around individual fire events that occurred in 2018, which was a severe fire year in California. We estimate our fire emissions using high-resolution Landsat satellite data at 30-meter spatial resolution. In the image on the left, you see an example of results from our project. In shades of red, there are new Landsat-based estimates. And for reference, we have a commonly used global fire emissions inventory known as GFAS, shown in gray in the background. Our next step is to model how these different fire emissions inventories impact subsequent smoke PM 2.5 concentrations. The plot on the left is showing the baseline model runs using the global GFAS emissions inventory for 2018. We then reran our atmospheric model using modified emissions from the new Landsat-based inventory. And the plot on the right is showing the ratio between these two model runs. So you can see that there are substantial increases in smoke PM2.5 with the higher resolution emissions estimates. The takeaway here is that there are important contributions that wildfires make to air pollution in California, and this is a regional public health issue. We're incorporating high spatial resolution satellite data to characterize large wildfire events, and this will be used to assess how future policies could reduce wildfire risks and the health burden. Thank you. I'd like to recognize my collaborators, and please feel free to contact me with any questions.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm making this video as part of my lighting talk at the Planetary Health Alliance Annual Meeting 2021. I am Nilanjan Bhor from Indian Institute for Human Settlements located in Bangalore, India. My talk is about urban air pollution and burden of non-communicable diseases in South Asia. Non-communicable diseases is abbreviated to NCDs for the rest of my talk. To begin with, I will set the background. As we know, the double burden of disease continues to increase the risk of morbidity and mortality. Moreover, the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic has reinforced how important it is urgently strengthen the surveillance, prevention, and treatment of NCDs, as higher mortality of COVID-19 cases was detected among those with comorbidities, especially in South Asian countries. South Asian countries have experienced high economic growth from 1990 to 2011, which led to substantial improvement in human development indices. This led to a sharp increase in urban population, even though it demonstrates that economic progress is linked to the improvement of health status. It has led to the emergence of NCDs. Considering this trend in epidemiological transition, the year 2000 is significant because it marked the beginning of efforts to bring the emerging epidemic of NCDs into national and global priority agendas. Besides behavioral and metabolic risk factors, ambient and household air pollution also contributes to higher mortality rates, mainly due to cardiovascular and respiratory diseases. Some of these diseases were ranked among the top 10 causes of mortality by the Global Burden of Disease GBD study in 2019. By performing a machine learning analysis using 2017 GBD data, it was found that there exists a positive and strong correlation between socio-demographic index and 4 NCD-specific indicators, such as NCD mortality, air pollution mortality, household air pollution, and occupational risk burden. Therefore, it is clear that the socioeconomic development activities such as rapid urbanization and industrialization, one of the drivers of air pollution, greatly influence the NCD burden in South Asian countries. We need other sources. We found other sources of air pollution, including biomass burning, fossil fuel combustion, resuspension of dust in residential areas, dust from construction and vehicle movements, and road dust as secondary sources of air pollution. In conclusion, many of these sources can be mitigated by improving the environmental dimension of the social determinants of health. It is critical to consider the ways in which inequalities in terms of exposure to environmental risk manifest according to factors such as income, occupation, education, and ethnicity. Effective planning and expansion of nature-based solutions like urban green spaces could be one of the local solutions for the global health challenges, such as prevalence of NCDs, air pollution, and climate change. To conclude, I want to underline the importance of strengthening urban local administrations as they could play a role in addressing social and environmental determinants of health, including mitigating the sources of air pollution. I hereby conclude my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to the speakers. And I just would like to remind people that although we've heard from Miriam and Nilanjan, so we've heard about wildfires and their effect on air pollution, and also Nilanjan's, who just spoke to us now, neither of those speakers are available for the panel, and you've been invited to pose your questions to both those speakers in the virtual chat room using the chat feature at the platform. So we'll be taking or focusing on questions here for the first three speakers this afternoon. I just simply like to sort of comment though from an Australian perspective with the devastating climate change caused bushfires or wildfires as they're called in other countries, that in addition to the 33 direct deaths, there were over 400 deaths associated with air pollution, which affected half the Australian population, 12 times hazardous levels at times. So, so over to our first three speakers today, Anna, Anastasia and Aubrey, who are here to form our panel. So I've got a sort of first question, which I will pose to Anastasia, if you don't mind, and that was about the fleet, the fleet that was electrified, just to give us a sense of those of the size of the fleet. What proportion, do you have a sense of what of the total number of vehicles on the roads, what percentage the municipal fleet made up?
Hi, thank you. That's a really good question. Off the top of my head, I am not sure of the exact number of vehicles that were that the proportion to the regular fleet compared to this municipal fleet. However, I can say that the total electricity demand once we electrified this fleet was about 1% of the entire of Chicago's entire electricity demand. So it's really like a smaller proportion of our fleet overall. Once you begin electrifying additional vehicles, such as passenger vehicles, that's when there are further questions about, for example, emissions remapping. But yeah, so I'm sorry, I don't have the exact ratio, but it's a relatively small number of vehicles in Chicago.
Great, no, thanks for that. And just whilst you're speaking about that, what you mentioned the various health outcomes. Were you actually mapping or viewing any particular health outcomes?
Yeah, so for the health outcome portion of this experiment, we were mapping where the premature mortality was. So this is probably one of the more conservative estimate of health outcomes because there are obviously other health outcomes that come from asthma hospitalizations. And we only focused on ozone and particulate matter actually. And there's associated morbidity and mortality associated with nitrogen dioxide. So back to your question, which was, sorry, could you repeat it?
Oh, were you mapping any particular health outcomes when you were looking at things?
Yeah. So we were looking at premature mortality when we were looking at these health outcomes.
No, thank you very much indeed for that. And there's some questions coming in the chat. We'll move over to Anna. And how are you translating? The question here is saying, how are you translating your research findings into policy changes in Latin America? And can you share an example on how you're doing this? There's actually a third question from this person saying, do you partner with advocacy-focused organizations? So a three-part question there for you, Anna.
Yes, thank you, Lang, for this question. I think this is why the purpose of showing these results that I think they are impacting, because they are affecting children and under an infant mortality, which is, one of the biggest concerns in Latin America, because infant mortality, although has perceived a slowdown in the last decades, is still high in the region. And I think this caught a lot of attention. This study has not been yet published, but so far we have disseminated it in webinars and trying to reach stakeholders. And I think there are at least, I see 3 ways of how this can be used as evidence. One is about what I was saying in the presentation, about the claim for having better, measures of air pollution or PM 2.5 in the region. This has been annual average of PM 2.5. So the results, although they are strong in the way they can link associations and through the causal inference process, they still are annual average, and we cannot account for seasonalities, for example, or other more fine ways of determining the origin of PM 2.5. So on one side, I think this is a claim for promoting in cities and also in other parts of the countries that were involved in this study, the claim for having determinations at the city of air pollution at local levels, and try to see variations over the day or over the month or over time in general. The other thing is that this also it's got interest on other institutions working on the impact, environmental impact of, for example, housing buildings, and also the heavy transit in Latin America, particularly in South America. Most of the commercial transportation of products across the countries. I don't know if you're familiar with the Mercosur, but this is economic coalition like NAFTA in North America that is based mostly on transportation on heavy transit. And the idea that, working with people that is trying to change the way energy resources are used for transportation through countries will also impact then on the way we change the energy resources for fueling transportation in cities. So the idea of showing that there is an impact on mortality, particularly among children, which is also implying a lot of economic impact in the future, it's also an evidence that is used or we are trying to push as a way of making changes first in trucks or big modes of transport that are moving the economy, and then could impact in other ways or modes of transportation. And the third way is, and this will be sooner another conference I will participate in. It's the idea of construction, because the industry of cement is one of the most impact in the environment with the emissions of carbon emissions. And also then with the construction of houses that are not very efficient, energetically efficient. And so, linking this idea of that by, reducing the impact of air pollution or carbon emissions in the ambient, you are also benefiting children. It's also very attractive to use to mobilize other sectors of the industry that are also impacting in the environment.
Thanks very much indeed. We'll take a question to Aubrey, and Aubrey, a question is from me, in fact, with the dust and the particulate matter that's actually sort of becoming airborne, are there, because of the source of the water, are there other toxins associated with the dust because it's agricultural runoff? So my question is what's the composition of the air pollution that's causing the pattern of disease that you're seeing?
Thank you for that. There absolutely is, especially in the area that I'm researching. It's a very interesting area because, as you say, it is agricultural. And so something that, because I was looking back in time, I wasn't able to look at things like the very proximal sources of dust and also just the spraying of pesticides. If you are to go into Imperial County, you'll see that there are crops directly across the street from neighborhoods where they're spraying for pesticides. And so it's very possible that that's another source of pollution and contaminants and a contributor to respiratory disease. Another very large source or potential source is that this is a border county. And just across the border, the US-Mexico border, is the city of Mexicali, which has many factories. And so that is the potential also to produce emissions. And so really depending on the weather, the way the wind is blowing, and your actual location within the county can really impact what you are exposed to and how much. So in this particular study, we chose to focus specifically on the Salton Sea, but there are definitely other potential sources. And I'm currently working on a project that will hopefully seek to tease out that distinction. But at the moment, because I was very limited, I was looking at the time to see if drought was a very big contributor. And so I chose to look back in time at when we had a very intense drought in California. I was limited spatially and data-wise to look at more detailed components of what else might have contributed to that.
And are you seeing any sort of immediate sort of policy changes or basically we're talking about adaptation here, but to actually try and dampen down that effect from your work?
From my work, I'm not sure. We're in the process of trying to publish still. This area of California is very interesting because it doesn't really receive very much attention, which is part of why I thought it was an interesting place to look at. A lot of the families living there are below the poverty line, are immigrant families. I think that unfortunately contributes to how much attention it's getting, especially because when it comes to even agricultural areas in California, it is the second most productive, but the most productive is much larger. And so that when people think of agricultural workers, they tend not to think about Imperial County very much. And I think there's another very complicated problem, which I mentioned in the presentation, surrounding water rights. And the farmers have very, very powerful lobbyists. And so unfortunately, it's very difficult to try to reverse the policies of how cheap water is. And really it is political suicide for any politician to go up against the farmers and say that they must pay more for water, or that they must be more sustainable in their farming practices. And so I hope that that will change. At the moment, I don't see it changing, but hopefully as we move forward, some progress will be made on that.
Mm. No, it's obviously information hopefully will fuel sort of policy intervention. So is there any sort of suggestions that you'll be making as a result of your findings about measures that could be taken?
Well, at the moment, one other thing that is not really politically driven, but there are efforts at the moment to see what can be done about the Salton Sea, to see if we can tamp down the dust that can be that might be emitted. But I think really the big issue that should be addressed is the economic value of water and the political power and who has it. And so it's a very complicated situation that I'm not an economist, and so I couldn't even delve into all the details of it, but that is really at the heart of what is fueled this problem. And so I think that really going forward, it's so necessary to be interdisciplinary. And so teaming up with economists, political scientists will also be essential.
Yes, one of the problems we face with climate change or the increasing desertification of the Earth, basically. So a lot more dust on its way, I think. Thank you very much indeed for that. A question now back to Anna, basically saying that it just depends on what level you were looking at, Anna, but evidently a study done in Los Angeles found a correlation between PM 2.5 and white matter brain development in children, suggesting long-term effects on children. Were you including sort of measures like that in your studies, Anna?
Well, unfortunately, we don't have data, longitudinal data on children to explore early child development yet in our study, in Salvopal study. But I think, yeah, it's very interesting. I know that there has been some studies, but in Spain, about looking at levels of air pollution or carbon levels in the classrooms and school performance over the year or over the years. But in Latin America, we have yet a challenge of compiling information on child's health, particularly early child development. It's really hard to recruit.
Thanks, Anna. And another question here about Latin America, and that is basically what are the major adaptation features and mitigation features that are underway, Anna, to deal with the issue that you've described?
Yeah, that's a hard question. I think it's a very good question. I don't know if I'm the person, more prepared to answer that. I think that as much as we can, I think that there is a challenge to show evidence in Latin America. But I think as long as we can gather information on how pollutants in the air, in the environment in general, are affecting health and also are impacting in the environment, we are able to construct a source of evidences that support some mitigation and adaptation strategies. So far, it's hard to make them as I think Aubrey also was saying. It's hard to make this put this in the agenda, political agenda of the local levels, at local levels in cities, and also at the country level or regional level.
No, thanks. Thank you very much indeed for that. Yes, I mean, air pollution is a very multiple sources, and so it's a very vexed issue to deal with. On that note then, Anastasia, from your work and the very sort of encouraging findings that you found, is that one way to deal with this is to get fossil fuels out of the air by electrifying. How is Chicago taking this forward, your findings?
Yeah, so actually, Chicago has begun to add electrified passenger buses into its municipal vehicle fleet. So there is definitely some political action that's adopting these policies. And I think the purpose of our experiment was to explore like a very easily adaptable policy for a city in order to address the pollution issues that we see in cities that are super common.
Great, thank you very much indeed. I think that is rapidly drawing us to a close of the amount of time that we have for this session. And so I'd just simply like to reinforce that there is no safe level of air pollution. I'd like to thank our speakers, all our speakers, all 5 speakers, encourage you and remind you once again to pose questions to Miriam about wildfires, and also to Nilanjan Bhor about his findings from India in the chat in their platforms, and to thank Anna, Anastasia and Aubrey very much for forming the panel this afternoon and helping us to explore this very, very important issue. And congratulations on your work. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I hope you have fantastic policy impact with all your work. Thank you, Philippi.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lynn, and all of you. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you, Philippi.
Thank you, Dr. Madden, for moderating, and also at such an inconvenient hour for you. Really appreciate that.
I have to say, when the alarm went at 2:02, I thought, I wonder if this is a great idea.
Yes.
But I was